A homeless boy's desperate warning to Donald Trump about a mysterious contract seemed insignificant that morning at Trump Tower's exclusive cafe. No one could have imagined that this ignored plea from a street-smart 13-year-old would expose a conspiracy threatening the peace of the entire country, and ultimately change not just 2 young lives, but the entire nation's approach to forgotten children. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Trump's favorite Manhattan cafe, casting long shadows across his usual corner table. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the subtle scent of success that always seemed to follow him. Before him lay a contract that promised to revolutionize American port operations. Or so he thought. 13-year-old Tommy stood outside, his worn sneakers shifting nervously on the polished floor of Trump Tower's lobby. His clothes were clean but threadbare, carefully maintained despite his circumstances. The weight of what he'd overheard the previous night pressed heavily on his young shoulders. The scene replayed in his mind. 2 figures in expensive suits speaking in hushed tones behind the shipping containers where he and his sister Sarah had found shelter for the night. Words like smuggling operation and perfect cover had drifted through the darkness, followed by mentions of today's contract signing. Sarah was safe for now, tucked away in their hidden spot near the library. "Be careful," she'd whispered as he left, her 10-year-old face pinched with worry. "Remember what Mom used to say? Do the right thing, even when it's hard," Tommy had finished, forcing a smile. Their mother's words, spoken so often before illness claimed her, had become their guiding star in the 2 years since they'd found themselves alone. Now, watching through the cafe's glass doors, Tommy studied the scene. Security personnel stood at discreet intervals, their earpieces and alert eyes marking them clearly. Well-dressed executives moved through the space with practiced confidence. And there sat Donald Trump himself, focused on the very documents Tommy knew could be dangerous. A woman in a crisp blue suit caught his eye. Something about her stirred a memory from the previous night, but he couldn't place exactly what. She moved with purpose toward Trump's table, tablet in hand, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Time was running out. Trump had picked up his pen, and Tommy knew that once those papers were signed, whatever plan he'd overheard would be set in motion. With a deep breath, he straightened his shoulders and did something he'd avoided for 2 years. He chose to be seen. As he stepped forward, something metallic glinted in Chen's hand, a sight that made his blood run cold. But it was too late to turn back now. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversation as Tommy took his first tentative steps inside. Security personnel glanced his way, but something about his determined stride made them hesitate. Perhaps it was the earnest look in his eyes, or the way he carried himself with a dignity that seemed beyond his years. "Mr. Trump, sir," Tommy called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Please don't sign that contract." The room fell silent. Trump looked up from his papers, studying the boy with a mixture of curiosity and mild amusement. Security began to move forward, but Trump held up a hand, stopping them. "And why not?" Trump asked, his tone measured but interested. The woman in the blue suit, Jessica Chen, Trump's recently promoted contract supervisor, stepped smoothly between them. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice carrying a note of practiced concern. "We don't know how he got in here. Security will handle this." Tommy tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat as he noticed something. Chen's hand, as she gestured to security, bore a distinctive ring, the same one he'd glimpsed in the darkness at the port. "I overheard," Tommy began, but gentle hands were already guiding him toward the exit. He caught a final glimpse of Trump's pen moving across the paper, and his heart sank. Outside, the winter wind bit at his face as he hurried back toward the library. Sarah would be waiting, probably worried sick. They'd need to move tonight. Staying near the port was too dangerous now. He'd failed to stop the signing, but at least he'd tried. Back in the cafe, Trump handed the signed contract to Chen. "Make sure this gets processed immediately," he said. "This deal could be a game changer for our ports." Chen smiled, clutching the documents to her chest. "Of course, Mr. Trump. I'll handle everything personally." That evening, as she left Trump Tower, Chen made a phone call. "It's done," she said quietly. They never even read the fine print. Miles away, her fiancé Marcus Wells looked up from his gambling debts, relief washing over his features. "Perfect," he replied. "Tell our friends overseas they can proceed with the shipments. No one will look twice at legitimate cargo." Neither of them noticed the small figure watching from the shadows, memorizing faces, listening intently. Tommy had learned long ago that sometimes being invisible had its advantages. But as Tommy turned to leave, Chen's phone lit up with a text: "Eliminate any witness, no exceptions." The screen's glow illuminated something else, a familiar ring that made Tommy's heart stop. In the dimly lit corner of their temporary shelter, Sarah sat cross-legged on their shared blanket, counting the day's earnings from her brother's odd jobs. Loose change and crumpled bills formed tiny piles beside her, enough for tomorrow's meals, but not much else. "How did it go?" she asked as Tommy slipped inside, his expression telling her everything before he could speak. "He signed it," Tommy said, slumping against the wall. "But Sarah, it's worse than we thought. The woman I saw at the port, she works for him. She's one of his executives." Sarah's small hand stilled over the money. At 10, she understood more than most children her age. Survival had taught them both to grow up fast. "What do we do now?" Tommy pulled out a worn notebook, one of the few possessions they'd kept from their old life. Inside, he'd carefully documented everything he'd seen and heard: dates, descriptions, snippets of conversations. It wasn't much, but it was evidence. "We need to move," he said finally. "The port isn't safe anymore. I heard them talking about shipments starting next week." "But your job," Sarah began, thinking of the dock workers who'd grown used to having Tommy help with their luggage and packages. "We'll find something else," Tommy assured her, though his heart ached at the thought. The port workers had been kind, often slipping them extra dollars or sharing their lunches. Some had even started looking for them specifically, trusting the honest young boy who never asked for more than he earned. That night, as Sarah slept curled against him for warmth, Tommy replayed the day's events in his mind. He should have tried harder to warn Trump, should have found a way to make him listen. The weight of what he knew pressed down on him like a physical thing. Meanwhile, in a luxurious penthouse across town, Jessica Chen paced her living room. Her fiancé, Marcus, lounged on the leather sofa, scrolling through his phone with apparent disinterest. "The boy could be a problem," she said, pausing to pour herself another glass of wine. "He seemed to know something." Marcus looked up, his expression hardening. "He's just a street kid. Who's going to believe him?" "Trump might," Chen replied. "You know how he is. He notices things others miss. We need to find that kid, make sure he stays quiet." Wells stood, crossing to the window. Below, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds. "I'll handle it," he said softly. "We've come too far to let some homeless brat ruin everything." Neither of them realized that within Trump Tower, the first signs of their deception were already emerging. A junior analyst, working late, had noticed discrepancies in the port contract's final version. Small changes, subtle alterations in wording that seemed innocuous alone, but formed a pattern when viewed together. The analyst hesitated, cursor hovering over the email icon. It was late, and surely someone else had already reviewed these documents thoroughly. Still, the email was sent, marked urgent, scheduled to reach Trump's desk first thing in the morning. By then, Tommy and Sarah would be gone from their usual spot, leaving no trace of their presence except for the stories told by grateful dock workers about the honest young boy who had tried to help everyone he met. Donald Trump's morning routine was disrupted by an urgent email flagged in red. As he read through the analyst's findings, his expression darkened. The coffee beside him grew cold, forgotten as he compared the final contract with earlier drafts. "Get me everything we have on the port deal," he barked into his intercom, "and find out who had access to modify these documents." Within hours, his office had transformed into a command center. Screens displayed security footage, document logs, and personnel files. But it was the cafe's security recording from the previous day that kept drawing his attention. "Play it again," he ordered, watching the homeless boy's desperate attempt to warn him. "There's something we're missing." The security chief cleared his throat. "Sir, we've identified him on other cameras. He's been around the Port District for months." Trump leaned forward as new footage appeared. The boy, always with a smaller girl in tow, helping travelers with their bags, assisting elderly dock workers, even guiding lost tourists. Each clip showed the same pattern: honest work, minimal payment, and a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his circumstances. He wasn't just surviving, Trump mused. He was watching, learning, find him. But Tommy and Sarah had vanished. Their usual spots yielded no clues, and the dock workers could only share stories of the helpful young boy who'd disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, across town, Chen paced her office, phone pressed to her ear. "What do you mean they're reviewing the contract?" she hissed. "Who authorized that?" Wells' voice crackled through the speaker. "Calm down. They can't prove anything. Just act normal." But Chen's hand trembled as she ended the call. Through her office window, she could see Trump's security team interviewing staff members. It was only a matter of time. Back in Trump's office, the investigation deepened. "Background check on Jessica Chen," he ordered. "Something's off." The results were pristine, almost too perfect, but a deeper dive into her recent activities revealed a connection. Her fiancé, Marcus Wells, with mounting gambling debts and suspicious meetings with unknown foreign contacts. "The boy knew," Trump said suddenly, remembering Tommy's desperate expression. Somehow, he knew what they were planning. The search expanded. Police departments were quietly notified. Shelters were checked. Security cameras across the city were reviewed frame by frame. And then, a breakthrough. A small convenience store's camera had caught them late the previous night. Tommy and Sarah, loaded with their few possessions, boarding a bus headed toward the outskirts of the city. "Smart kids," Trump's security chief noted. "They knew to get away from the port." Trump studied the grainy footage, noting how Tommy positioned himself between his sister and potential danger, even in their retreat. "Not just smart," he replied, "brave." The investigation continued through the night. Chen's carefully constructed facade began to crack under scrutiny. Her recent purchases, her late-night meetings, her fiancé's suspicious activities, it all painted a disturbing picture. But the real shock came when they discovered the full scope of the altered contract's implications. Hidden in seemingly innocent clauses were provisions that would have granted unprecedented access to critical port infrastructure. The potential for smuggling was just the beginning. This isn't just about illegal shipments, Trump realized, the pieces finally clicking into place. This is about national security. As dawn broke over the city, two parallel searches intensified. One for the criminals behind the plot, and one for the children who could help expose them. Tommy and Sarah, meanwhile, had found temporary shelter in an abandoned building on the city's edge. As his sister slept, Tommy added new entries to his notebook, recording every detail he could remember about Chen, Wells, and their late-night port meetings. "We'll figure something out," he whispered to his sleeping sister. "We always do." He couldn't know that at that very moment Trump was staring at his photo on a security screen, saying words that would change their lives forever. "Find those kids, whatever it takes." But someone else was watching the same security feed. In her darkened office, Chen smiled as she traced Tommy's location on her tablet. "Found you," she whispered, reaching for her phone to make one final call. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories about courage, kindness, and the unexpected heroes who walk among us every day. The morning brought new challenges for Tommy and Sarah. Their meager savings wouldn't last long, and this far from the port, Tommy's usual odd jobs weren't an option. They sat in a small diner, sharing a single plate of eggs while Tommy planned their next move. "I miss helping the dock workers," Sarah said quietly, pushing a piece of toast toward her brother. "They were nice to us." Tommy nodded, his throat tight. The port workers had become something like family, the closest thing they'd had since losing their parents. Some had even started leaving extra food in their break area, pretending not to notice when it disappeared. "We had to leave," he reminded her gently. "Those people Chen was meeting with, they weren't good people." At Trump Tower, the investigation had kicked into high gear. Security footage from every camera near the port was being analyzed frame by frame. Chen's movements over the past months were mapped out, revealing a pattern of late-night meetings and suspicious phone calls. "Sir," Trump's security chief entered with fresh intel. "We found something interesting about Wells. He's been making regular trips to a private marina, meeting with individuals flagged by multiple agencies." Trump studied the photos spread across his desk. "And the kids?" "Still searching, but we found more footage of them from the port. You need to see this." The video showed Tommy helping an elderly dock worker with a heavy load. The worker offered him $20, but Tommy only accepted $5, the agreed-upon rate. Another clip showed him finding a dropped wallet, chasing down its owner to return it intact. "He's been documenting everything," the security chief explained, pointing to the notebook visible in Tommy's back pocket. "Watch how he writes things down after each shift. This kid wasn't just working, he was gathering intelligence." Trump leaned back, his expression thoughtful. He knew the value of information. Smart boy. Meanwhile, Chen's world was unraveling. Her office had been quietly searched, her phone records subpoenaed. Wells wasn't answering her calls, and her foreign contacts had gone silent. She found Wells at their usual meeting spot, a high-end bar overlooking the city. "They're investigating everything," she hissed. "This is falling apart." Wells barely looked up from his drink. "You worry too much. Even if they find something wrong with the contract, they can't prove we did it." "What about the kid?" Chen demanded. "He was there that night. He heard us." "He's just a homeless brat," Wells sneered. "Who's going to believe him over us?" But Chen wasn't so sure. She'd seen the way Trump had looked at Tommy in the cafe, that moment of connection before she'd interrupted. If they found him. Across town, Tommy and Sarah had found a new routine. They stayed near public places, libraries, parks, anywhere they could blend in with normal foot traffic. Tommy had started helping at a local food bank, earning enough to keep them fed. Sarah spent her days in the library, devouring books like their mother had taught them. Sometimes she'd read the newspapers, keeping an eye out for any mention of port contracts or shipping deals. "Tommy," she called one afternoon, her voice urgent, "look at this." The article was small, tucked away in the business section. Trump Organization delays major port contract, cites irregularities in documentation. Tommy's hands trembled as he read. They were investigating. Maybe someone had noticed what he'd tried to warn them about. Back at Trump Tower, the net was tightening. Chen's carefully constructed alibis were falling apart. Her foreign contacts had been identified, their connections to various criminal enterprises exposed. The contract was just the beginning, Trump's security chief explained. They were planning to use our ports for something much bigger. Trump stared out his office window, watching the city buzz below. And somewhere out there, 2 kids are hiding because they tried to stop it. The search for Tommy and Sarah intensified. Police were quietly advised to look for a teenage boy and his younger sister, but not to approach, just report their location. Tommy noticed the increased police presence. He saw how their eyes lingered a bit too long, how they seemed to patrol more frequently near the food bank and library. "We might have to move again," he told Sarah that evening as they shared a sandwich on a park bench. Sarah looked up from her book, her eyes wise beyond her years. "Maybe," she said slowly. "We don't have to run this time." "What do you mean?" "The newspaper said Trump stopped the contract. Maybe he figured it out. Maybe he'd help us." Tommy considered this. The risk was enormous. If they were wrong, Child Services would separate them for sure, but if they were right... He pulled out his notebook filled with dates, names, and overhead conversations. Everything he'd seen at the port, every suspicious meeting, every strange shipment detail, it was all there. "We'd have to be sure," he said finally. Sarah squeezed his hand. Mom always said the right thing isn't usually the easy thing. Neither of them noticed the security camera above the park bench, its feed being watched by very interested eyes in Trump Tower. "Got them," the security chief announced. "Sending a team now." Trump raised his hand. "Wait. Send someone they'll trust. We don't want to scare them off again." As dusk settled over the city, an elderly man approached Tommy and Sarah's bench. They recognized him immediately. Joe, one of the kindest dock workers from the port who had often shared his lunch with them. "Been looking for you two," he said gently, keeping his distance to avoid spooking them. "A lot of people have." Tommy tensed, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah. "How did you find us?" Joe smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Mr. Trump asked me to help. Said you might trust a familiar face more than men in suits." Sarah gripped her brother's hand tightly. "He knows about us." "Knows enough to understand you were trying to help," Joe replied. "He'd like to talk to you, both of you, but only if you're willing." Tommy's mind raced. This could be a trap, but Joe had always been honest with them. More importantly, he'd been kind when kindness meant sharing food he could barely afford himself. "The woman in the blue suit," Tommy said carefully. "Chen. Has anyone been watching her?" Joe's expression shifted. "They've been watching everyone, son. Your warning didn't fall on deaf ears. Just took some time for them to see what you saw." Meanwhile, Chen was growing desperate. Her secure phone line buzzed with an urgent message. Their overseas partners were pulling out. The operation was compromised. She burst into Wells's apartment, finding him calmly packing a bag. "What are you doing?" "Cutting my losses," he replied without looking up. "You should do the same. They'll trace everything back to us." Wells finally met her gaze, his eyes cold. "That's why I'm leaving. Tonight. You're on your own." Back at the park, Tommy had made his decision. "We'll talk to him," he said, "but we stay together, no matter what." As they walked toward the car, Tommy glanced at Joe's hand. There, catching the fading sunlight, was a ring identical to Chen's. His heart stopped. Had they just walked into a trap? Joe nodded solemnly. Mr. Trump was very clear about that. No one separating you two. The ride to Trump Tower was quiet. Sarah held her brother's hand while Tommy clutched his notebook. Joe made no attempt at small talk, understanding their need for silence. In his office, Trump waited with his security team. The evidence against Chen and Wells was mounting, but they needed Tommy's testimony to connect all the pieces. When the children entered, Trump was struck by their composure. Despite everything they'd been through, they carried themselves with quiet dignity. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to comfortable chairs. "I believe I owe you an apology for not listening the first time." Tommy sat, ensuring Sarah was beside him. "You believe me now?" "We've been gathering evidence," Trump replied, spreading photos across his desk. "But we need your help to complete the puzzle." Tommy pulled out his notebook. "I wrote everything down, every meeting, every conversation I overheard, the ships they talked about, the names they mentioned." As Tommy shared his story, the full scope of Chen and Wells' operation became clear. They had planned to use the altered contract as cover for a massive smuggling operation, just the first step in a larger scheme to compromise port security nationwide. "But why did you try to warn me?" Trump asked. "Most people would have looked the other way." Sarah spoke up, her voice small but clear. "Our mom always told us that doing the right thing matters more than being safe." Trump's expression softened. "Tell me about your mother." The story spilled out. Their mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, the impossible choices that led to them living on the streets rather than being separated by the system. "She taught us to read, even after she got sick," Sarah said proudly. "Made us promise to never stop learning." And to help others when we can, Tommy added. That's why we stayed near the port. The workers there, they needed help, and helping them meant we could eat. Trump shared a look with his security chief. The plan they'd discussed earlier suddenly felt more right than ever. I have some friends, Trump said carefully. The Andersons. They've been trying to adopt for years, looking for children who'd be a perfect fit for their family. Would you be interested in meeting them? Tommy and Sarah exchanged glances. Together? Tommy asked. Always together, Trump confirmed. And there's something else. Your notebook, the evidence you gathered. It's going to help us stop some very bad people. You didn't just save the ports, you might have saved lives. Outside Trump Tower, Chen's world was collapsing. Wells had disappeared, taking their emergency funds with him. Her foreign contacts had gone dark. And now security footage showed Tommy and Sarah entering Trump Tower. It was over. Chen's phone buzzed one last time. The message made her smile. Backup plan activated. Timer set. Let them think they've won. She looked at the building's schematics on her screen, where red dots blinked in strategic locations throughout Trump Tower's foundation. The next 48 hours unfolded like a carefully orchestrated chess match. While Tommy and Sarah met with the Andersons in Trump's private conference room, federal agents moved to secure evidence across the city. Linda and Robert Anderson were everything Trump had described: warm, genuine, and immediately captivated by the children's story. Linda, a former teacher, lit up when Sarah mentioned her love of books. Robert, who ran a successful construction company, listened intently to Tommy's experiences helping at the port. They've never been separated, Trump explained to the couple. That's non-negotiable. Linda wiped away tears. We wouldn't dream of it. These children belong together. But outside this peaceful scene, chaos was erupting. Chen had gone into full panic mode. Her apartment was filled with shredded documents. Her computer wiped clean. But she knew it was too late. The evidence in Tommy's notebook would be damning. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Port Authority office, now, urgent. When she arrived, the office was dark except for a single desk lamp. Wells sat there, his face illuminated by the harsh light. You came, he said flatly. Stupid. Behind her, the door clicked shut. Two men she recognized from their overseas meetings stepped from the shadows. Our employers are very unhappy, one said smoothly. This operation was years in the planning, millions invested, and you let it fall apart because of a homeless child? Chen backed toward the door. Wells promised he could handle everything. The contract, the security protocols. Yet, here we are, the man interrupted. Mr. Wells has made arrangements to disappear. You, however. At Trump Tower, Tommy was sharing everything from his notebook with federal agents. Sarah sat beside him, occasionally adding details he'd missed. Their perfect recall, honed by months of survival, proved invaluable. They met every third night, Tommy explained, pointing to his careful notes, always after the second shift change. The foreign men, they spoke a language I didn't understand, but they always carried the same black briefcases. Trump watched through the observation window, his expression grave. Those kids saw everything. They could have sold this information to anyone, made enough money to get off the streets. But they didn't, his security chief replied. They tried to warn us instead. The Port Authority office erupted in chaos as federal agents stormed in, acting on Tommy's intelligence. Wells was caught literally reaching for a hidden gun. The foreign operatives were apprehended trying to escape through a maintenance tunnel. But Chen was nowhere to be found. Back at Trump Tower, Sarah had fallen asleep on a comfortable couch, Linda Anderson gently covering her with a blanket. Tommy sat with Robert, discussing the possibility of helping with his construction company's shipping logistics once things settled down. You have a mind for details, Robert observed. That's rare in someone so young. Tommy smiled faintly. Had to learn fast. Making mistakes on the street isn't an option. A commotion outside drew their attention. Chen had somehow made it past building security, her designer suit disheveled, her eyes wild. She held something in her hand, a thumb drive. "This has everything," she announced, her voice carrying a hint of desperation. "Every contact, every plan, every account number. Let me walk away, and it's yours." Security surrounded her instantly, but Trump held up his hand. "Why now?" "They'll kill me," Chen said simply. "Wells betrayed everyone. I'm dead either way, might as well choose how I go down." Tommy watched the scene unfold, understanding better than most the calculations Chen was making. When you're cornered, sometimes surrender is the only way to survive. The tension in Trump's office was palpable as Chen's thumb drive was analyzed. Tommy and Sarah sat with the Andersons, watching the drama unfold through the safety of bulletproof glass. Security teams moved with practiced efficiency, securing every exit and entrance. The data is legitimate, Trump's cybersecurity expert confirmed. Account numbers, shipping manifests, contact lists, everything we need to dismantle their entire network. But Tommy noticed something others missed. While all eyes were on the computer screens, Chen's right hand kept drifting toward her designer handbag. "Mr. Trump!" he called out suddenly, his voice urgent. "Her bag! Check her bag!" Security reacted instantly. Inside Chen's purse, they found a small transmitter still actively broadcasting. She hadn't come to surrender, she'd come to gather intelligence. "Clear the building," Trump ordered. "Now!" The evacuation began immediately. As people streamed toward the exits, Tommy grabbed Sarah's hand, but instead of running, he turned to Trump. "The service elevator," he said quickly. "When I worked the docks, guys like Wells always talked about having backup plans. Service routes, maintenance access, places security doesn't usually watch." Trump's eyes narrowed in understanding. "The construction tunnels." "Anderson," he called to Robert, "your company did the renovations last year. Where do those service tunnels lead?" Robert pulled out his phone, quickly accessing the building plans. "There's a connection to the old subway maintenance system. If they've studied the layouts—" A distant explosion cut him off. The building shuddered slightly. "They're not trying to escape," Tommy realized. "They're trying to destroy the evidence. All of it, including us." Trump's security team sprang into action. Chen was secured. The thumb drive data was being uploaded to multiple secure servers, and evacuation protocols were in full swing. But Tommy knew they were missing something. "Sarah," he said urgently, "remember what you saw in the port office? The maps they always kept hidden when we cleaned?" Sarah's eyes widened. "The red lines. They weren't just shipping routes, they were tunnel systems." Linda Anderson pulled Sarah closer protectively, but the young girl was already explaining, her memory perfect as she described the infrastructure diagrams she'd glimpsed while helping clean the port offices. "They don't just want to destroy evidence," Tommy concluded. "They want to collapse the whole transportation network, ports, tunnels, everything." Trump looked at the children with newfound respect. Even now, faced with danger, they were thinking, analyzing, helping. "Get them out," he ordered the Andersons. "Take our secure vehicle. Get them somewhere safe." But Tommy stood his ground. "The maintenance room," he insisted. "Level B2. I can show you where they'll plant the charges. I've watched them plan this for months." "Absolutely not," Linda protested, reaching for him. "He's right," Trump said quietly. "He knows things we don't, but Sarah goes with the Andersons." Tommy knelt before his sister. "Go with them. I promise I'll come back." Sarah hugged him fiercely. "You better. We're supposed to stay together, remember?" As the Andersons whisked Sarah away, Tommy turned to Trump. "We don't have much time." The descent to Level B2 felt like entering another world. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows as Trump, Tommy, and a select security team navigated the maintenance corridors. "There," Tommy pointed, "behind that electrical panel. They always talked about the building's weak points." The security team moved forward, equipment scanning for explosives. Their devices screamed to life. "Multiple devices," the lead agent reported. "Professional grade, timers already running." Above them, the building shuddered again as another explosion rocked the upper levels. Tommy's face was pale but determined. "They'll have backup units," he said, recalling overheard conversations. "Always redundant systems. Check the water main access points." Trump watched as the boy directed his security team with the precision of a seasoned strategist. Every detail Tommy had cataloged during his months of survival was now helping save lives. 7 minutes on the timer, an agent called out. "The subway tunnel," Tommy said suddenly. "That's their escape route. Wells had a man who worked maintenance. They'd have a vehicle waiting." Trump grabbed his radio. "All units, converge on the subway maintenance tunnel. Suspects are mobile." The next few minutes were a blur of coordinated chaos. Bomb disposal units worked frantically while tactical teams moved to intercept Wells and his remaining associates. Tommy stood with Trump in the command center they'd established, pointing out potential routes on the building's schematics. "If I were them," he said, "I'd use the old service line, the one they closed last year. Nobody watches it anymore." He was right. Within minutes, reports came in of movement in the abandoned tunnel. "Suspects in custody," the radio crackled. "Tunnel secure." The final moments of the timer ticked down as the bomb squad worked. Tommy held his breath, thinking of Sarah, of the Andersons, of everything that could be lost. "Clear." The call finally came. Devices disabled. The relief in the room was palpable. Trump placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder, his expression both proud and humbled. "You didn't just save the building," he said quietly. "You helped us stop something much bigger." Tommy looked up at him. "I just did what Mom always said. The right thing." The celebration was cut short by an urgent alert. On the security screens, multiple red dots began blinking across the city's port infrastructure. Tommy's eyes widened in recognition. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. 1 month later, Trump stood before a packed press conference, but his focus wasn't on the thwarted terror plot or the international smuggling ring they'd dismantled. Instead, he spoke about family. "Today, we're launching the Future First Foundation," he announced, as Tommy and Sarah stood proudly with the Andersons, a nationwide initiative to build and support orphanages and foster programs across America. The children had transformed in the past month. Clean clothes, proper meals, and most importantly, the security of a loving family had brought out their natural brightness. Sarah's love for reading had earned her top marks in her new school, while Tommy's insight into shipping logistics had already improved several of Robert Anderson's business operations. "But this foundation isn't just about building homes," Trump continued. "It's about recognizing potential in unexpected places. 2 children living on our streets saw what trained professionals missed. They chose to help others when they could barely help themselves. Chen and Wells faced lengthy prison sentences. The international network they'd served had been dismantled, thanks to the evidence Tommy had gathered. His notebook now sat in a federal archive, a testament to the power of one boy's determination to do what was right. Sometimes, Trump said, his voice carrying across the hushed room, our greatest heroes come in the smallest packages. They remind us that character isn't about what we own or where we live. It's about the choices we make when no one is watching. Sarah squeezed her brother's hand as Trump concluded the speech. Their new home with the Andersons was everything they'd dreamed of, but they hadn't forgotten their roots. Every weekend, they volunteered at local shelters, helping other children find their way home. "Mom would be proud," Sarah whispered to Tommy. "She is," he replied, smiling at their new family. "And so am I." The Future First Foundation would go on to help thousands of children find homes, but its first success story would always be remembered. A boy who chose to help others even when he had nothing, and a girl whose faith in her brother never wavered. As cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, Trump watched the children with their new parents. Some victories weren't measured in dollars or deals, but in the simple sight of 2 children finally finding their way home. If this story touched your heart, remember that there are real children out there right now who need our help and support. Share this story to spread awareness and consider supporting organizations that help homeless youth and families in need. Together, we can make a difference, one child at a time.